Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. Many big stories breaking this morning to bring to you. So new inflation numbers out. The picture continues to be dire. We have all of the details there for you. President Biden also addressing this in a major speech, clearly trying to reframe the debate on inflation, which has been obviously very damaging for you all, but politically dire for Democrats. So we'll bring you all of those details. But there's a lot else that is going on as well. A massive package of aid, mostly going to defense contractors, ultimately passing with regards to the war in Ukraine. Very little dissent, but where the dissent came from is actually kind of interesting. So we'll give you the details of that. Also, a Palestinian-American journalist was shot and killed while covering an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank. We will tell you everything we know about what unfolded there. Really a horrific, horrific tragedy. We also have new numbers with regards to overdose deaths. The numbers continue to go up. There was some hope that that might not be the case as the pandemic started to ease in 2021 and lockdowns came to an end, but in fact the numbers just continue to get worse and worse. So the details there are also important to get into. And finally, we have some new numbers with regards to the ratings of Simone Sanders' debut on MSNBC. Just how did her first show featuring the First Lady, how did that go? We'll tell you about that. Ryan Grimm is going to join us as well. He actually reported out an extraordinary story about the sort of derailing of a DSA progressive campaign, political campaign close to DC that is interesting and instructive.
It tells you a lot.
A lot of ways. So we're going to have him lay that out since he did the reporting on this. But we do want to start with those brand new numbers on inflation, Saagar.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. These are really important numbers. So this is the overall year-over-year increase by price in terms of specific product categories. So I'm just going to read some of those for just who are listening. Gas, 44% up year-over-year. Airfare, up 33% year-over-year. Eggs, up 23% year-over-year. Utility gas, 23. Used cars, 23. Hotels, 23. Bacon, 18. Chicken, 15. Milk, 15. Furniture, 15. Coffee, 14. Beef, 14. Flour, 14. New cars, 14. Fish, 13. Electricity, 11. Health insurance, 10. Rent, 5. So basically everything you need in your entire life is at a minimum up 5 and at a maximum is up around 20. So not a good situation. Now, the way that the media is trying to spin this, and I'm doing an entire monologue just on the media and inflation, is just so hilarious to me. Let's put this up there on the screen. The AP says, U.S. inflation dips from the 4-decade high, but still causing pain. It's like, yeah, it dipped to 8.3 from 8.5. So not necessarily a huge win. And actually, in terms of the overall increase in price, which you see in the most critical categories like gas and food and gas, food, rent, housing, etc. I mean, you just have a situation where it's devastating for most Americans. The Biden administration, we'll get to his speech, is trying to spin it, talking about wage increase. They're like, well, wages are up 2 to 3%. It's like, that's not even going to cover your rent inflation.
That's not
it's not even going to cover your rent inflation, let alone food inflation, let alone gas. I mean, the lack of focus here on the most basic bread, butter, like household expenses by the administration is going to kill them. And I think that the really depressing part about this, and kind of was the end of my diesel monologue on Tuesday, is there ain't no way out of this thing right now. Yeah. I mean, gas right now is still $4.30 a gallon, Krystal. Airfare is very high, specifically, not only because of high demand, because everybody wants to travel this summer, but jet fuel is like $7 a gallon in New York Harbor. Eggs, same thing. I didn't know this, but 10% of all the chickens in America apparently died of some weird bird flu this year. So we have some crazy, I know. It's like this year cannot
possibly catch a break on a single freaking
Literally
thing.
10% of all the chickens died from a crazy bird flu this year.
Wow.
And then utility gas, obviously, that comes from natural gas. Hotels, demand is sky high. Bacon, I've talked before about the pig shortage and meat, and there's all kinds of crazy things going on in the meat supply chain. Same problem with milk. I mean, just I can go on forever. Every single one of these categories, the price here is probably only going to increase over the next year, maybe even 2 years as the supply chain problems shake out. And there's not a lot the Biden administration, they could have done something, maybe a year ago, 6 months ago. At this point, they're just showing us that they're not really going to do anything. this is here to stay for a long time to come. And that has major ramifications.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the way that they're trying to spin it and say, well, there's some good news buried within this report, even though actually the inflation increased more than they were expecting. So it was a worse report than they were expecting. And the stock market once again dipped because of that, because they're looking not just at inflation, but they're also reading the tea leaves of, okay, if inflation remains high, that's going to force the Federal Reserve's hand in terms of having to tighten the economy more and potentially, end up with what they did in the 70s and 80s, which is forcing the country into recession to try to get inflation under control. But so what they're pointing to is they say, oh, well, core prices, so-called core prices jumped twice as much from March to April as they did the previous month. But there are signs that supply chains are improving for some goods. Prices for appliances and clothing both fell. Cost of used cars dropped. You remember the used cars sort of like led the charge in terms, they were one of the first.
It was a leading indicator.
Yeah, it was. It ended up being a leading indicator. But those prices, for things that are essential to you, for food and for rent and for gasoline continuing to spike at such a rapid pace. I mean, those are the things that really hit household budgets, and that there's just obviously no avoiding paying to get to work, paying to feed yourself and your family, for example. So it's an extraordinarily difficult situation. And I was reading one analysis, I thought this was interesting too, about how this impacts people psychologically as well, because, even in a downturn, when you lose your job, we have this whole mythology about the bootstraps and how if you just work harder and you just put yourself out there, then you can overcome these circumstances. With inflation, there's no mythology about like, well, this is really somehow your fault.
Yeah.
Everybody, it feels completely out of your control. There's nothing you can do other than just like cut corners and cut back and cut to the bone what you're ultimately spending for yourself and your family budget. And that sense of powerless is also, that's just a really horrible feeling where you know that there's nothing you can do to keep up with these rising prices, where you know that every time you go to the grocery store, you're going to be able to get a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less with your dollar. So I think that part of it too, it's the reality of the cuts people are having to make, and also that sense of powerless that there's just nothing in your control that you can do about this whatsoever.
I think that's an excellent point. Actually, I was talking about this with some friends yesterday about how I finally understand some of my parents' quirks about paying down their mortgage and the way that they're relentless. And it's well, they had mortgages that were 9% whenever they came to this country. A lot of people had mortgages which were 12%. I can't even conceive of what that looks like. And a lot of people, even probably older than my parents, really remember the 1970s and the chaos of having to stand in a gas line for 8 hours or going to the grocery. At that time, runaway inflation was a really real thing. And then you have crazy economy and it just feels like the whole world is falling apart. I'm starting to understand how some of this stuff can imprint on you as a generation.
For sure.
Honestly, I think it'll probably imprint on us. 20 years from now, you're gonna be like, hey man, you don't know what it was like. I can't be the only guy. You go to the grocery store, you see the same pack of something you bought two months ago, and you're like, what? This is $10 more expensive.
Yes.
You're this is crazy town. And you ring up, and even though you think you're being economical, you're it's $250. It's what is happening here? This is one of those things where that is just gonna stay with you for a long time. I try to think back on the Great Recession and how it kind of imprinted us and changed our whole politics, maybe as much as the Iraq War. And for me, it was, I lost faith in the entire financial system. I was oh, this thing is fake. I was I don't know exactly why. We can talk about mortgage-backed securities and et cetera, but I just looked at it, and then, the fact that they got bailed out, and then the fact that they all got rich, but so many people lost their homes. I just posted a photo yesterday, which really just bummed the hell out of me. And it was a side-by-side photo of Detroit in 2009, the same house, versus the same house in 2019. And in 2009, there was a kiddie pool in the front, and there was a guy outside mowing his lawn. This is Google Maps or something.
Yeah.
In 2019, the whole thing is overgrown. The garage is trashed, and the whole street is empty.
Yeah.
And you're oh my God. That really is the legacy of that. That imprinted really heavily on me. I think inflation is going to imprint heavily on all of us, Gen Z, everybody.
Well, The thing is, too, that these crises are no longer coming once a generation. It's like, it's speeding up. I mean, you know, you lived through the Iraq War and the crash and COVID and the COVID crash, and now this, you know, this chaotic economic circumstances that we see right now. So it just feels like it's all coming so quickly. I definitely saw my dad is older, and so he was born during the Great Depression in West Virginia, you know, grew up in complete poverty. I mean, lived in like a one-room shanty that his dad built. And you definitely see the way that frugality stayed with him his entire life, you know, continues with him today, where he can tell you, like, he's the classic guy who had the same coat that he bought in the 70s that, you know, he's wrapped in duct tape and can tell you exactly what it cost when he bought it in 1973. Like, that's my dad. So there's no doubt that these things have massive generational impacts. And you also see right now, we talked some about the crypto crash and that stable coin that we talked about before.
Terra USD.
Yeah, it's.
Disaster.
I mean, it's a complete disaster. It was down to like 50 cents. This thing is supposed to be pegged at $1, and now you have people who sort of put their faith in crypto and put their faith in these the stable coin in particular. They're posting on Reddit like suicide hotlines. They've lost everything, and so. Yeah, is that going to stay with people for their entire life? Is that going to, not just psychologically, but just from a literal, like, what do your life chances and choices and what does it look like for you from here on out? Yeah, that's going to be with people and set their trajectory for their entire lives. So those are, you know, it's a very dire time. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.